Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to put floors and beams into a floor plan. So as you can see here in the drawings that you should already have, we have a floor plan here with the beams, and you can't see the floor but it is on top of all of the beams. These are different colors. The colors just mean that the beams are different sizes, different types. So it might be like a 14 by 200 or 14 by 100 just for example. And the beam sizes that I'm going to be using in this video aren't actually the correct sizes. You're going to need to figure out the beam sizes on your own, but I'm just going to show you how to choose a beam size when creating a floor plan. So let's get started. And to be clear, I'm not going to be coloring the beams in this video. That's going to be in a later video later on about filters and parameters. For right now, we're just going to be placing the beams into the view. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually kind of goes against what we did in the last video about vertical columns, is we're going to select all the columns. And I would recommend making them go lower by, I would say maybe -9 feet, just an example. And we're doing that because if we have them at 0 offset and we have the beams below that, that means the beams will not be able to attach to the columns in this floor. So they're going to look a little differently than they would on other floors. So we're just lowering the columns temporarily so the beams can have something to latch onto in this view. So once you've lowered all the columns, we can start by placing a beam. We're going to click beam. Then if you click that, it'll show you all the beam sizes that you already have saved or that maybe that are default. But you notice that this isn't a lot when in actuality there's like hundreds of different types of beams. So when we want a wide flange for this view, but let's say we don't want one that's already here. If we do, we would have to go to Load Family, scroll down to Structural Framing, Steel, Wide Flange, and then we have this big list of all the beam sizes available. We can choose any of them because, again, the size that I'm choosing here is not actually the correct one, just an example, but I'm just going to choose one at random, like, let's say 14 by, that seems too big, I don't know, 14 by 342, I don't know, I'm just making this up, so. There we go, 14 by 342. And we are going to start with the center beams, or the beams that are in green here. So we're going to click at the midpoint, then click at a second midpoint, and you click away. If you notice that it's maybe a line, that's probably because your coarse is set to, your detail level is set to coarse, but if we set it to medium, it'll go right back. So I like to keep it in medium view when dealing with beams. And you notice that these beams latch right onto the edge of the column. If we hadn't lowered it by 9 feet, it would have gone straight to the grid line or even further, which would have messed up our view a little bit. So now we can see the beam attached to the column. So now we're going to do the same thing with the same beam type. Make sure it's set on reference level 1. Make sure your view is at level 1 too. I'm going to click there and click there. And just to be clear, you'll see the column, you see those little arrows right here? You can move that, and that'll just give you the view. Control Z that. But you see the little dot there? That signifies like the actual column node. It means that it's actually centered onto the column. That's centered onto the column, it's centered onto the grid line. So even if it doesn't look like it's on the grid line, but you see that little dot there, that means it is. This is just for appearance or for the sheet, but for analysis, when you need all of them, fixed together, just know that they actually are fixed together. So now that we have these first two to start off with, what we're going to want to do is make an array. So I'm going to click one of the beams, click array. We're going to need 4 of these. I'm going to click right here. Doesn't matter where exactly, as long as you just lower it by 20 feet. And there we go. Now we have 4 beams of the same type, all the same dimensions away from their own columns. And now we're going to do the same thing right here with this beam. Change that to 4. And now we have these edges. So now what we can do next is create even more arrays to get them all into the center there. So, and I'm going to do press and hold Control to click the rest of these beams. And then I'm going to do another array. Lowered by 20 feet. I'm going to change that to 4. Oh, that needs to be 5. And now we have 5. So I guess that gives us maybe 20 beams total there. Repeat the process over here. Press and hold Control. Array. 5. 20 feet. And there we go. That's all of the beams. You may notice that some of them are overlapping around the columns. That's not a big deal. Like, if it does bother you, you can always adjust them, pull them in and out. But again, this is just for appearance. It doesn't actually affect the structural analysis. But now we have all of these center beams placed. So next I'm going to be doing the beams around the perimeter. So I'm going to click Beam. Save the project, because that'll pop up sometimes. You can set it so it'll send you reminders every 10 or 15 minutes to save. It'll usually tell you to do that at the beginning once you open Revit. I would recommend setting that up because, you know, for obvious reasons, if you lose a save file, that's pretty unfortunate. So now I'm going to choose a different beam type. And I would recommend choosing a bit different beam type for each section, even if they aren't the right size, because later on, when we're going to use filters and parameters to color the beams, we're going to do that based on the beam sizes. So you really want to have different beam sizes for each section. So next, I already have a few pulled up here that were saved from me working on this before. So I'm just going to choose, say 257, but again, you can always do the load file process to pull up the rest of the beams that you need. I'm gonna click right there at the midpoints of these. Same thing right there. Click on it, do array. We're gonna need 6 of these. Still that 20 feet apart. And let's repeat that here with an array. $20 And now you can repeat the array again, or you can always know if you don't like arrays for whatever reason, you can always trace out all the beams, you know, there's nothing against it. It just takes a little bit more time to do. But now I'm actually gonna, to save even more time, I'm gonna do a mirror. So I'm gonna click all the beams on one side using Control. I'm gonna hit mirror, pick axis, and then I'm gonna hit the grid line in between them, number 4. And there we go. Now we have all the beams on the other side. And I'm going to repeat the same thing on the top here. Mirror, pick axis. And there we go. And that shows all the perimeter beams, and again, they'll line up so that they're outside the columns. And now I have the perimeter beams. Now we're going to do the beams that are inside the purple beams as they were in the last sketch. So let's create beam. Again, we're going to pick a new type. I'm going to pick 283 for, again, no real reason, but I'm going to place the first one right here. Then I'll place another one. Now we're going to create an array again. But for this array, we're going to need 9 of them, and they're going to be every 10 feet. And you notice that maybe some of these will align with the columns, or some of them will align with the outside of the beams here. Just depends on where they are. So Revit is pretty smart software that it knows like where to start and stop all the beams. Then we repeat the same process up here. And now I'm going to do the mirror again. And that's all of the outer beams. So now all we have left to do is the diagonal beams. So go to structure, beam. I'm going to choose a new beam type again. This time I'm going to choose 311. I'm not going to do any array with these because there's so few of them. Just going to draw them all out. And that's all the beams. You may notice that some of them conflict. Again, they are fixed, so it doesn't matter structurally, but if it does bother you visually, you can always click on these little arrows, pull them in. That's completely optional though. You don't have to do that. It's whatever your personal preference is for how you think the sheet should look. So once we do that, checking to make sure that they're all the same size doesn't hurt. Okay, and now we have our final beam type, which are these smaller horizontal beams that will connect to the diagonal. And I'm going to make those 176, 14 by 176. And with these, again, I'm just going to draw them out. There's not many of them, so I need to make sure they're at the midpoint. So I'm going to make them 10 feet from there. Wait. Oh, I messed up there. Wait. Yes, these should be on the outside corner. Sorry, I messed that up. These should be sorry about that, but now we have all the beam types there. I'm going to pull up the other view just to make sure. And yes, that looks right. So now we have all the beams placed in the view. And a good thing to do once you finish that is always check the elevations, you know, make sure there's nothing weird going on. And yes, they look right. And we can pull up a 3D view too. And yeah, you can see them all there. They look right. And another thing that I want to show you here at the elevation is that all of these columns are set to align so that the top is aligned with the level 1 elevation. Depending on how you create your building, you can change that. I actually made mine so they were all centered with the grid line, which comes in handy if you're building the diagrid building, and I'll show you how to do that. Here, if you click on level 1, okay, yeah. One of the things that can be a little annoying about arrays is that you have to ungroup them all if you want to edit them. So I'm going to ungroup all these. There's not really a shortcut to ungrouping them. You can't ungroup them all at once. You just have to click all of them, but I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to skip to when this is done. I finished ungrouping all of the elements, so what I can do, and to check that I've ungrouped all of them, select all of them. There's no diagonal boxes left, so I know I've ungrouped everything. So now what I can do, I'm going to hit Filter, and I'm going to only have the structural framing elements left. I'm going to click Apply, because that's all I want to focus on right now. And now I can go to the Properties, and I can check the vertical elevation of the beams. So if I go to Z offset, or I can go to Z justification right there. I'm going to change that from top to center, apply, and now if I go to the west elevation, or south elevation, the beams are no longer centered at the top of the grid lines, they're centered. If you are doing the standard straight skeleton system, it probably won't matter too much either way, but if you're doing the diagrid system, it could affect it, because when you're making your slanted columns, they are going to be centered at each of the grid lines, and that way these are centered at the grid lines as well. And now, next, I'm going to go back to level 1, and I'm going to put in my floor. For this, I'm just going to use the standard floor that was already selected, which is a 3-inch concrete on 2-inch metal deck, so 5 inches total. I'm going to draw it in. I'm going to click the box. I want to center it with this grid line. and I'm gonna click the bottom corner there. Now I have the box selected, and that is the floor. You can't see it, but if we go to the south elevation, well, I don't see it there. What I can do is change the height offset, so I'm gonna make it 1 foot 1 inch higher. Apply. And now we can see it there on top of the beams. Or if we change it to the west elevation, there we are, we can see the little grooves that signify that it's the floor. So that is how you add horizontal beams and floors.